Welcome to episode number 52 of Life Without Cravings. Today I have a really great interview that I want to share with you. I have been waiting for this interview to happen for about 5 months, I would say. And I'm so happy that we finally got together and we finally had this chat because I think you're going to love it. And I'm so excited about it. And I think it's important for you to hear the message from a different perspective. So I'm interviewing Matt Kay, a somatic-based psychotherapist, holistic AOD counselor, and also a former addict. He's now helping other people out of trauma and addiction, and we're discussing things like what addiction actually is, and that addiction physiologically, there is no difference between being addicted to heroin and being addicted to food or sugar or whatever. Physiologically, it's the same thing. We're also talking about how it's possible to heal from addiction and how we can actually use the substances that we have been addicted to before without going into a relapse, i.e. food freedom. If you're a food addict, you can relearn how to handle food without going back and having a binge. I know you're going to enjoy this one, so I'm not going to talk anymore. Let's just get into it.
Hi, Matt. Thank you so much for being here. I have really been looking forward to this one, and I could probably talk to you for like 10 hours, but we'll see where we go with this. I just want to say thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate it.
You're welcome. Yeah, happy to be here.
Awesome. So just to give people a little bit of context of where you're coming from, what you have been through, and kind of where you are now, would you mind just running us through like your story? Yeah. Take the time you need, because you have a really interesting story that I think people need to hear, and so that they can kind of understand the weight of what you are going to share.
Sure. So it's a big story. There's a lot in my 33 years of life that I could speak to, and each kind of even event or period of time has its whole story within that. So, like I'll just kind of tell the basics of my life and what I went through. And, everything I teach now is a product of that. It's like a child of my life. It's like experiential learning. It's like my whole life is like a research project into trauma, into addiction, into crime, into the criminal mindset, into all of those kind of things that we label as dysfunctional, try to fix. We see problems. It's like I've lived that to its extreme. And, it's like a research project, like having that inquiring mind, that inquisitive, questioning mind, to be able to discern and look at things objectively. It's like I started to see and be able to map out the blueprint of like what addiction actually is, what trauma actually is, and what drives these things in our lives. So, my life, I grew up in what you would call middle upper class. Like I had everything I needed objectively, materially. I went to a private primary school, and the emphasis at this school was like good grades, like make sure your tie's done up, your socks pulled up. It's like they used to pay the neighbors to look with binoculars out the window to call up the school to say if we didn't have our socks pulled up. Like it was that kind of intense. And then we'd get a detention if we didn't have our socks pulled up on the way home. And
excellent.
It's like, if you want to create a hypervigilant nervous system, it's like do that stuff in it to a child. But like growing up in that environment, it wasn't just school, it was my home environment too, like lack of emotional awareness and all of that sort of stuff. It created a sense of deficiency in me. There's something wrong with me. I didn't fit into that compartmentalized way of being. It's like cookie cutter approach to education, to learning. Like I didn't fit in at all with that. I was very different, and so none of my needs were met in that sense. I didn't fit in at all, and I was severely bullied from probably about prep to year 7. And bullied these days, it can, people can say, oh, like in primary school, someone calls you a poo head, like that's bullying. But, the bullying I experienced wasn't just that. It was like targeted, cornered abuse daily, repeated over and over again, and there's a difference between that kind of bullying and just like the subtle everyday kind of remarks that people might make or experience. And when bullying's severe enough, it really affects the development of identity, and the development of self. And when there's already a feeling of I don't fit in here, I don't belong in this world, there's something wrong with me, it impacts and compounds that sense of shame and deficiency and feel unsafe in the world. So, my childhood led me to have a representation of the world, like a filter that I saw the world through that said, you're not safe, something wrong with you, the world's dangerous, you don't deserve friends, everyone's going to pick on you, rah, rah, rah. So then I became isolated in this kind of mental prison, and then when I would reflect back on myself, it's like I was the problem, I wasn't able to objectively discern these were my environmental circumstance and this is me. It was like they became blended together. So my worldview and my self-view became one of absolute hell, to live in, and I got stuck in that. And that's on the cognitive level, it's like cognitive distortions due to childhood trauma. And on the nervous system level, I got stuck in, what they call hyperarousal, pinging between hyper and hypoarousal. So I was either in a panic state, like severe anxiety and panic attacks, or completely shut down, depressed, dissociated, and disconnected, numb. So I would ping between all these survival states. And to me, developmental trauma is something everyone's got to varying degrees. Different parts of the personality become oriented around surviving the environment, and that's developmental trauma. And my personality was completely oriented around survival. And when that happens, the nervous system gets stuck in these states of panic, terror, rage, anxiety, shame, etc., etc., etc. They become the center of the self, the orienting principle. And so living, like, fair enough to say, was very uncomfortable, growing up. And when I hit about, I think it was when I was about 8, like I raided my parents' liquor cabinet for the first time. And
Wow.
8.
And
I got blind. Like, it wasn't just like I just had a sip. Like, I was blind. I had to go to hospital, get my stomach pumped and vomiting everywhere and stuff. But I remember as I started to feel it, this my survival physiology, I didn't know this at the time. I just knew, I feel better, I feel okay. Like, for the first time, it was like, I know now my physiology went back down. It turned off that agonizing pain or numbed it for a while. And it's like, that was my first glimpse, like, oh yeah, wow, substances, this is what they do. I feel I can be myself. I feel calm. I feel better. That's how I would have framed it then. I feel better.
how did you get the idea at age 8? I wouldn't even have thought about it, I think.
I don't know, maybe, like, it's not something I've really inquired into, but maybe that pull just to escape myself was already there, unconsciously happening under the surface. It's like I wanted to try that. So that, that drive that then drove my addiction later in life was there. And, so by age 13, I was smoking pot and smoking methamphetamine before school, and snowballing into addiction very, very quickly. The same thing happened when I first smoked pot. It was like, something softened and relaxed in me.
How does a 13-year-old get their hands on methamphetamine?
It's just like, you can if you want it, if you really want it. It was around. It was like I was hanging around older people who were doing that stuff, and so when I left my primary school, I unconsciously started making friends with the bullies, you know, the people who were at the back of the oval smoking weed, getting suspended, getting into trouble, robbing other kids' lockers, the ones everyone was scared of. It's like I didn't know this at the time, but I did that because it's like, if I'm with them, I'm safe. I'm not going to be bullied anymore.
Yeah.
I'll become the abuser to keep myself safe from being the abused.
Yeah.
And it's that victim perpetrator cycle, you know, the anger of the victim festers from being abused, and then they become the perpetrator.
Yeah.
And that was my cycle. And I see this happen with a lot of people, you know, like the abuse in their childhood causes them to adapt to that and become the abuser in adulthood. And it's a way to stay safe and stay feeling in control. And, you know, so I started using, I'd, you know, smoke weed before school. It was the only way I could cope with the anxiety, you know, of being in the world. It was like, you know, if I didn't have drugs in my system, it was like I was walking around without skin. You know, that's the best way I can put it. Just like raw, panicky, just, it was terrible, you know.
I can imagine.
Yeah. And
or maybe not.
Yeah, or drugs, you know, they would put a buffer between me and life. They became my only coping strategy. And so it was like, you know, I'd smoke weed, and then at this age, and then it'd feel like I'd have skin again. And then it'd wear off, and that anxiety, my nervous system would go back into survival state. And of course I'm going to go then do it again.
Of course.
Yeah, of course. It's like a sane decision, you know, in that moment. And, you know, so like, it's like you think of a baby crying and screaming, and mum comes in and picks it up. It's like, you're safe. It's that same response. You know, the baby's crying. It's in a survival state. It can't come out of stress on its own. So it doesn't know what to do. It falls into hypervigilance, you know, hypervigilance. And then mum comes in and gives it that support, that resource, being held, and it relaxes. So you could say my nervous system was that same anxious, you know, stuck in stress, or collapsed, shut down, depressed, and then smoke weed. It would have that same effect of relaxation, being grounded, coming out of that space, or, you know, a buffer, you know, or methamphetamine would help me. Like, I'd feel like I could be myself, you know, I could function better. I wasn't overwhelmed with these kind of agonizing feelings at the start, you know, and then it started to put me into psychosis and make things a whole lot worse eventually.
Yeah.
And so, you know, that's when my addiction journey started. And at the time, you know, the therapeutic interventions were like counseling, shaming the behavior, like what you're doing is wrong, you know, you're going to ruin your life. Haven't you watched those shows on drug addicts? Really shaming, condemning what I was doing. But it was my only way of coping. It was like a child's teddy bear, you know, they've got their teddy bear. It helps them feel safe. It's like taking the teddy. Don't you know teddy bears are terrible for you, you know? So it was that. And what did that do? That compounded that feeling, what's wrong with me? Because I was conscious that this is the reason I'm doing this, you know? So it was like, I don't know how to stop, can't stop. Every time I try to stop, I fail. And then I'd get this shame, like, what the hell is wrong with me? So it would compound that story, that narrative, that belief system, and those somatic imprints that I had throughout my childhood. There's something wrong with me. I'm different. God fucked up when he made me. And as though that kind of narrative. And it's like the way the external message I was getting from everyone else was, yes, that's true. You know, now look at you. You know, you're smoking methamphetamine and smoking weed. So it compounded those feelings, which would then cause my system to become more distressed, more anxious, you know, more shut down. And of course, the only remedy is to go and use again.
Yeah.
So it became this self-perpetuating loop, you know. The more I'd try to stop, the more I'd be caught. you know, like a Chinese finger trap, you know, where the fingers are in and you try to get out and you can't. It's like the more you try to fight it and get out and use willpower, the more your fingers are trapped in it. And so I kept going like that up until I was 27, 26, 27. You know, I ended up stopping smoking weed and ice, and I ended up injecting heroin. That was my main drug of choice when I was 16, 17. I started doing that every day, did that every day up until for 10 years. And, you know, pharmaceutical drugs also. I was on methadone for 7 years, Xanax. Like I would eat copious amounts of Xanax and prescription pills and sleepers and shoot heroin on top of that and drink alcohol on top of it. And so, like, you know, the methamphetamine had started to give me paranoia, send me into psychosis. It stopped giving that relief and started to cause further contraction. And then heroin, I used to say it's like a big hug from mum. You know, even before I knew any of what it was doing, you related it. So it's like, you know, you're sick and your nose is running and mum comes in and gives you a hug, like it's okay. Just gave that sense of, and it was like the ultimate form of resource, you know. It's like opiates, they can have a very feminine, maternal kind of energy to them. You know, when you take an opiate, it can have that sense of feeling held and relax the nervous system and tensions, long held tensions. And of course, I'm going to do it again. It's like, I don't know how to be with my contractions. I don't know how to be with my dysregulated nervous system in a way that helps it return to regulation naturally. You know, there's nothing in me that knows how to come out of stress. You know, my system doesn't know how to self-regulate. So the only way it can regulate is via a substance. And this applies to all addictions, every addiction. And everyone's doing this in different forms. It's like, you know, scrolling Facebook is an attempt to regulate, or when it becomes an addiction, is an attempt to regulate our nervous system. Eating food is an attempt to regulate our nervous system. You know, shooting heroin is an attempt. It's the same thing, but it's like a spectrum of different degrees. I wouldn't even say of extremity. Sometimes it is, but it's like more like different extremes of what's acceptable and functional within culture and society. You know, like eating sugar, you can still function in society a lot of the time, you know, but shooting heroin, it's like you can't, because of the condemnation and shame. And, you know, I actually said to my dad like a few days ago, he's a retired pharmacist, and I said, doctors should prescribe people heroin. They prescribe the methadone, which is far worse, far more addictive, far more difficult to come off. They prescribe the methadone, but they should prescribe them heroin whilst they're addicted and give them the right therapeutic interventions to deal with their trauma, to deal with their underlying wounds, to start to help to heal their nervous system, to give them enough insight as to why they're addicted, et cetera, whilst they start to taper off it. I said, if that was done with me early on, you know, it would have saved a whole lot, you know, and the person doesn't then become a criminal.
Don't they do that in some countries, or have I just imagined that?
Portugal, they decriminalized drugs completely, and now they can't prisons. They haven't shut them down. Like, it's worked wonders, but yeah, it's not the case. I think it's Portugal or Iceland, you know, one of those countries. They should do that over here. They don't do that in Australia.
No.
And so I ended up, you know, heavily addicted to heroin and prescription medication on methadone. I was being prescribed a ridiculous amount of benzodiazepines from doctors. Like, I was a professional doctor shopper. I ended up in prison a few times, you know, in youth justice centers and then in adult maximum security prisons on methadone. So I just go in there, drink my methadone, no rehabilitation in there. And
Crazy.
I'd leave and just go and use straight away and start doing crime again to support my habit. And it's like the level of pain I was in without these drugs in my system. It's like, people, you do anything to get out of that. It doesn't make you a bad person. Like, it doesn't mean you enjoy doing crime or lack empathy for the person you're robbing or anything like that. It's just, you know, it's like you're being tortured and your only way out is that, your only way to get any relief from the torture is that. And so your subjective experience of the world is 24/7 like being tortured, and the only relief you get is heroin. You're going to do anything to get that heroin.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely anything. And it doesn't make you a bad person. It doesn't mean you're inherently broken. It just means this is how you've had to adapt to survive. And with the right treatment and interventions and, somatic work, you can start to heal the nervous system and start to heal from this. And so I ended up, I went to rehab 17 times.
Holy shit. Yep.
Yeah.
Just 17.
Yeah, I know people that have been more. I was speaking to someone the other
I'm
who
sure.
went 32 times. And like 17 attempts at rehab, failed attempts, actually 16 failed attempts, because the last time was a success. And
what
so
made the last time successful? Did anything change, or was it just you decided that this is going to be the last time somehow?
but both, I think. So like my trauma was never looked at. It was always behavioral based therapies, changing your thoughts, changing your behaviors, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I remember like every time I'd get out of rehab, like I would sincerely want to stop.
Yeah.
But I get out of rehab, wouldn't take long, like the clock's ticking, and then I'm on the way to the dealer's house, and it's like I'm walking there and my mind's going, you don't do it. Please, like begging me, don't do it. You know what's going to happen. The revolving door, you're doing the same thing again. Like you've proven it 15 times. You can't just go enjoy a shot of heroin and then come back. And, I'd be begging myself, and then I'd be mulling up in the spoon. And so there's this dissonance between my body and my mind, that was happening. My nervous system, so like survival physiology trumps cognitive functioning every time. That's why we can't, drown ourselves without like tying a cinder block to our legs. We will come up for air, unless we kind of swim deep enough, because the survival instinct is stronger than willpower that overrides the frontal cortex. And so it's the same thing happening with addiction, which is why willpower 90% of the time won't work.
Yeah.
Because our survival physiology overrides our willpower. The amount of people I work, and then the amount of people I've worked with who was like, I've tried to stop over and over and over and over, and I'll stop for a bit. We can kind of hold it at bay for a while, but when it rains and it pours, something happens in our lives, and it will match on petrol. It's like we go pick up the drink, the behavior, etc., because our system still hasn't learned to self-regulate. And when we become overwhelmed and dysregulated, that go-to will be the mechanism that happens, and we will get hijacked by that. And so that would happen to me over and over again, and that was never addressed. And I'd see other people getting clean, and looking back now, a lot of the time it's, they're switching the witch for the bitch. It's like swapping one addiction for another. And even like using 12-step meetings as an addiction, or like the gym, or, becoming perfectionists about everything in their lives, and different sorts of obsessions and compulsions, but the underlying dysregulation was still there driving everything, or sex addiction, relationships, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So those core things, it's almost like the rehabs I went to, it's outside of awareness. What I'm talking about now, it was outside of awareness. It's still unconscious, even in their programs. It's not even seen to be a factor in what addiction is. All they're seeing is the compulsive use of something, or the compulsive behavior. That's the problem, but it's not. There's something underneath it that's steering the ship. And so that was never addressed. And the last time I went to rehab, it was like my life was such a mess. All my friends were dead or in jail. And no one left except 2 people. And, I got called into the psychiatrist's office of the rehab, and they told me that one of them had died from an overdose. And then like a few nights later, watching the news, my other friend had been sentenced to 17 years in prison for murder, something he did in psychosis on methamphetamine. And it was at that moment, it was almost like veils lifted, and like I could see for the first time, like, it's like, how the fuck did I get here? You know, before that, I was so lost in all of it that I didn't really have any space to look at things objectively, like how I got here, you know. And I had a panic attack in that moment, and I was already withdrawing from opiates and benzos, and like the anxiety was so strong, like I was running to the toilet trying to make myself vomit it up, and it wasn't working. And for the next week, I just remember being in such intense anxiety, like terror coursing through my system, laying in bed, and my mind's just begging me, please go use, you know, just leave, go use. And I had to just stay with it. And I knew, like, my whole being knew, if I don't get it this time, I'm going to die. It's the last, it's like the actual, you know, fork in the road. It's like, I knew, every part of me knew, if I go back now, I'll die. And, I intuitively knew, like, I need to work on my trauma. You know, that's, if I don't do that, then I'm going to end up using again. And I'd heard like Gabor Mate talk about trauma driving addiction, but I'd never gone that deep into it. And so I left that rehab after 28 days and went into a transition house for 2 years. I spent in that, into a kind of rehabilitation, sober living space. And I started to see a trauma therapist. In that time, I saw them for 2 hours a week. And I remember the first time I saw them, we had a memory come up of, I had someone die in front of me of an overdose, and trying to resuscitate them, and the panic that was still stored inside me. And we brought that up, and I remember spiking into the panic, and usually I would get stuck there, you know, unable to come out of it. And then I'd go and use to come out of it. But we brought that memory up in like a really skilled, contained, safe way, and completed that stress cycle. And I remember my system going, it's like, this is why I use. It was just so clear. It's like, okay, that just gave me the exact same thing that drugs do. It brought me out of that stress contracted state. And I remember realizing, you know, like, I could be in full-blown physical withdrawal from opiates, jump in my car, you know, be going through red lights. I need to get to the dealer's house to score, in this unbelievable panic, you know, rising fight, flight, freeze response, stuck there. As soon as I'd get the stuff, the gear, I'd put it in my pocket, wouldn't even use it. I'd still be in physical withdrawal, you know, but I didn't even need to put it into my system.
Yeah.
So that tells me that there's a lack of safety within the nervous system. The drug withdrawal isn't the addiction. The addiction is the addiction, or the need to find regulation. Because as soon as I put it in my pocket, something would calm down, you know? So the drug's not the problem.
That's so good.
Yeah, it's fascinating. And so I started to develop this kind of mind where I started to look at things like, oh, wow, you know, started to gain this understanding and map of addiction. And so I spent the next 2 years in therapy, like in trauma therapy, and trauma therapy that wasn't just talking about my trauma over and over again. I'd done that kind of therapy, and it just made me dissociate further from it, to the point where I would just tell the story and I wouldn't feel anything. And I even had a psychologist say to me, yeah, I think you've resolved your trauma.
Oh, wow.
But I was just frozen and dissociated from the retelling of it over and over. It's like I was cognitively okay with it, but my whole system was still stuck in a trauma response that wasn't being recognized. And so it was through repeated experiences of coming in, inviting in the stress, and then learning to come out of it, my nervous system started to become more regulated, and I started to be able to experience stress and build resilience and come out of stress. And so I was in 12-step programs for probably about 2 to 3 years of my recovery. And I needed to be abstinent for that 2 or 3 years. Just to break that pattern while I really worked on myself. I'm not saying I'm not abstinent from opiates and stuff now, but like I can have a beer and all of that sort of stuff without it triggering that compulsion. But, so what happened is, I kept seeing this trauma therapist, and my system started to learn how to contract into stress and come out of stress on its own. And I started to see, very, very clearly that this is what addiction is. Addiction is that dysregulated system seeking homeostasis, seeking regulation again. And so I started to question a lot of the 12-step beliefs I'd adopted, like it's a disease, and like, it's manageable, incurable. You're going to be stuck like this for the rest of your life. And if you pick up one drink, that's it, it's over. You're going to fall. That was true to a certain extent, if I was only managing my dysregulated nervous system. But if I started to learn how to regulate my nervous system naturally, that compulsion lessened and lessened and lessened and lessened. It's like when I started to experience stress, I started to gain the capacity to really stay with it, whilst it started to regulate itself, to move through the, the stored pain and the fight, flight, freeze response. As that started to move through, I was able to learn to stay connected, present, and associated with it without that compulsion to run away, to, to numb it, to dissociate from it. And as I was able to do that, the compulsion and the obsession lessened and lessened and lessened and lessened and lessened, and as that started to lessen and lessen and lessen, so did so many different addictive behaviors, and so did so much inner turmoil and stress, and it's interesting, because I used to think, like, if I was feeling anxiety, or if I was feeling for lack of a better term, negative emotion, or an let's say uncomfortable, I hate the term negative, an uncomfortable emotion, that meant I wasn't at peace. But that's not the case anymore. It's like I can actually be feeling uncomfortability and be completely at peace with it without that struggle, that inner kind of conflict. If I need to get away from this, I need to get rid of this, I can be much more surrendered to it and at peace with it without that need and compulsion, to go and use heroin or this or that, etc., etc. And so, that's a process, because, healing the nervous system isn't just like, you don't cross a finish line and it's like, I'm fully healed. It doesn't work like that. It's like evolution. It just deepens and deepens and deepens and deepens. And so there's no kind of end goal where it's like, okay, my nervous system perfectly self-regulates and I'm fully healed from my trauma now. Because it's anyone that sells you that idea is either believes it themselves or is not telling the truth. But that's not the way it works. It's like one layer. It's like an onion that you're peeling that just keeps going and going and going and going. And our capacity to regulate and stay with things and be okay with all aspects of ourselves and experience the whole spectrum of the human like the human experience, that's what grows our capacity, to stay with it, and window of tolerance. And so as that's happened, my views on addiction really changed. I stopped seeing it as, like a disease, unless we say like dis-ease, something's not at ease. Yes, that points to my nervous system being dysregulated. Self-centered fear, they talk about in 12-step programs, that's a response to trauma. You had to develop a self-centered fear in childhood in order to survive and to protect yourself. And the God-shaped hole inside the void, or whatever they talk about, that's that sense of lack and disconnection from yourself and something larger, or response to trauma. So I don't see my model of addiction as disproving or debunking the 12-step model, but more like an extra piece of the puzzle. Like, this is the cause as to what you're saying, they got part of the story, right? And it's so, like, my view on this has continued to evolve, and it evolves through working with people every week. I work in private practice with this. I run trainings, worldwide trainings, that help practitioners learn how to work with addiction and trauma. And so my whole life shifted and transformed. Like, I've got 2 kids now, a family, a house, and a business like I don't use anymore. And like, it's an ever deepening journey of like self-discovery, realizations, and integrations into myself, and like a kind of exploration, you know, now. And so then my message comes out of that, out of my own direct experience. Yeah.
Do you think everyone who's addicted to something has some childhood trauma going on?
Yeah. I think there's some level of dysregulation in the nervous system, because that's what addiction is. It's an attempt to regulate it. And I think we all have childhood trauma, and trauma can be a loaded word, and people can have presuppositions and ideas as to around what that word means.
Yeah.
But unmetabolized life experience.
I like that.
Yeah, it's like experience that still lives within us.
Yeah.
That limits the way we function in the world now. We all have that. You know, everyone has that experience that still lives in us. And it's like, you know, someone, you know, got cheated on in a relationship, and then they have a distrust in relationship. That's trauma, you know, in this context anyway. Trauma isn't what happened, it's what happens inside of us in order to cope with what happened. So we adapt, you know, we might never trust fully again. That's a limitation. That's the experience still living within us. So we all have that, and those experiences put stress on the nervous system. You know, we lose the ability to fully relax naturally.
So I'm just thinking, if we just operate from the belief that everyone has trauma, because I also believe that everyone does to a degree, is just on a spectrum of how bad it is. But not everyone is addicted to something, or do you disagree with that?
I think everyone has different coping strategies, you know, everyone has different ways they cope with it, and different ways they come out of stress. For some people, it might be, you know, scrolling on Facebook too much. For other people, it might be drinking a few too many coffees. For other people, it might be compulsively eating. For other people, it might be, you know, having to shoot heroin 4 or 5 times a day just to survive the moment. So that, like you said, it's a spectrum, and addictions is a spectrum. It's the same mechanism, the same process happening on this end. Some people will be celebrated and work and create a really successful business and do things in society. Other people, you know, chronic people pleasers, like they'll help people, you know, they'll try to be kind and nice, and they're constantly, you know, looking for approval unconsciously. But it's the same mechanism of seeking regulation from an outward source, you know, or a behavior, a compulsive seeking of regulation, I should say.
Yeah.
You know, it's consciously with intent, you know, it's a loop that happens. So on this end of the spectrum, it's the same mechanism as heroin addict. One can be celebrated and not looked at, and this is where it comes back to functionality within society and culture and our collective beliefs and viewpoints about certain behaviors versus others. But it's actually the underlying it is the same thing.
I completely agree. And I think that's important to keep in mind, because the people that are going to watch this are mostly going to be food addicts of some sort, carb addicts, etc. And I think it's hard to grasp that it's the same mechanism. And I do get comments sometimes. People say, yeah, well, would you say that if it was heroin or whatever? And heroin just has different consequences when you consume it for the person actually doing it than sugar does. Sugar is sort of harmless in the moment, unless you're eating a lot and you're type 1 diabetic maybe. But in general, it's kind of harmless unless you do it for many years. So would you treat any addiction the same way, whether that was a food addiction or a heroin addiction?
Definitely. And like it comes back to, you know, social acceptability is a big, it's like if people are addicted to medications, it's like that's socially accepted. So they don't become criminals. They don't get society. They don't suffer the stigma. They don't suffer the shame. You know, it's like, oh, good, you're taking your medication, you know? But we can be just addicted, in my experience, to medication as we can to heroin, even more so. And, you know, like I would treat it exactly the same because it is the same. It's the same thing, you know, food addict and the heroin addict are doing exactly the same thing, and that's running away from something, trying to escape something, trying to seek something that is lacking in their experience. You know, if you were to ask a food addict, what does food give you? What do you get out of it? What's the good thing? You know, because you're going back to it for a reason. What's the good thing? I have no doubt that will be along the same lines as, you know, you ask a heroin addict, what do you get out of it? I get to relax. I feel like I can be myself. You know, I feel more connected to people. I feel like the pain stops, you know, like it stops my anxiety. It's the same thing. And so if we can drop those kind of conditioned beliefs, because they are just conditioned beliefs, you know, then not true. They're illusion, you know, that heroin's far worse. The consequences, yes, that's not illusion, but the actuality of it, it's the same process happening. So you treat it exactly the same. So when someone's dysregulated and in stress and in pain, they need to learn to regulate. You know, they need to work through the things, the unmetabolized life experience that's causing the dysregulation and causing that reaching. It's like addiction is something's here that we may or may not be conscious of. You know, I've explained trauma to many people. So I don't have trauma, but they're drinking every day, you know, can't relax. This may be something that they're not conscious of, that they're then reaching for something else to pacify it, you know, to give them that sense of relaxation. You know, it's like, I can't relax. I can't sit still. I'm anxious. I feel disconnected. I don't feel like I can be myself. They're the issues. You know, the fact food or heroin remedies that. Food or heroin isn't the problem.
Yeah.
So it's the solution. It's the remedy, you know. It's like I said, heroin kept me alive. If it wasn't for heroin, I would have killed myself. Life was that surprising. It kept me alive, 100%.
Yeah.
Never the problem.
So when you, sorry, go on.
As much as I was told it was the problem, it was never the problem.
Yeah. I'm wondering, like, when you're helping people, do you even introduce the concept of non-abstinent recovery, or is that not something that you want to bring up with people because it can easily be like the motivation behind wanting to quit so that they can still have it, and then that just backfires in a way?
Oh, sure. Like, well, you know, some people, it's like, oh, well, like I get asked this a bit. It's like, if I do enough trauma work, will I be able to drink? An alcoholic asking me that. Or if I do enough trauma work, will I be able to, you know, use or go out and take some stuff at a party or whatever?
Yeah.
And it's like, well, if you're asking that, then your whole intention for healing is so you can drink again. You know? And it's like, unless it's as relevant as having a banana or not having a banana, then we shouldn't be asking that question. It's like our orientation has to shift from that. You know, the guiding principle of our healing can't be so I can use again.
Yeah.
We have to shift to a more like grounded approach. Like, what will it be like if I can regulate? You know, and look, abstinence was super important for me for a time. I don't know how someone could be abstinent from sugar these days. You know, but like, yeah. It's in everything, you know. Or, you know, a food addict then is someone who's abstinence from all food. You can't be. You know, you need to eat to survive. And it's like abstinence to me isn't the point. If we're abstinence, then it's like I started seeing the 12-step programs, and there's nothing wrong with 12-step. It can help a lot of people. Just like everything, it has flaws. You know, everything we can find fault in everything and flaws in everything. But you know, it's based on a fear of, an aversion to. That's still within the realm of addiction, because addiction is craving and aversion. You know, I'm still not using because I'm afraid of it.
Oh, I love so much that you just said that.
Yeah. I haven't actually gained any mastery over it.
Yeah.
I'm just scared of it. So I'm not going to go there. That can be helpful for a certain period of time, you know, like it's like, you know, if someone's used every day for 10 years and they need space from it to break that pattern, it's like, well, I'm not going to go there. not saying I, need to go and use heroin now, but it's kind of like, it's more now, and I'm not saying I couldn't be addicted to heroin again. I'm just saying it's more of a conscious choice. It's not because I'm scared of it.
Yes.
It's like using heroin. It's like, well, I don't really want to do that at this point, and I've had a drink. I haven't been drunk in probably 8 years. And it's like if I have a drink, like, if I have an alcoholic ginger beer or something, it doesn't do the same as what it used to, and
how often do you have a drink?
I've probably had about less than 20 in 5 years, and usually I'll drink about half a drink, and then it's like I don't really want the rest.
So that's kind of freedom to choose.
Yeah, exactly.
I don't want it anymore. Doesn't do anything for me.
Yeah, exactly. And so, it's a continuous process of exploring, noticing my tendencies, noticing whether I'm moving away from something, what am I running from in myself? If there's any kind of behavior that's coming up, it's like curiosity. Well, what's it about? It's that mechanism. There's some kind of uncomfortability in myself that I'm running from, some disconnect, some emptiness, some sense of not feeling whole that I'm now trying to move towards. But if I can gain an ability to stay with that, it's like that's opposite to addiction almost. It's like I can start to stay with that. And as I stay present and connected to it, it begins to find integration. It begins to be acknowledged. A lot of these parts and wounds are created because they weren't acknowledged. There was no empathic witness to see them and acknowledge the distress and the pain we're in. Yeah. And we split off from them. So we're starting to give these parts of ourselves that presence that they require to heal. And, that's another ever deepening journey, because we develop more and more capacity to do that.
I'm wondering, would you say that, like, when we're talking about non-abstinent recovery, would you say that it would be possible with any kind of drug if you just do the trauma work and you go through a period of abstinence, so that you are at a place where you feel like you do, like it's not that important anymore? Do you think you could bring any kind of drug back in and actually do it recreationally?
It's a look, I can't give an absolute answer to that, because life is always, throwing curveballs at us. We get different stress responses. Someone could experience a trauma, but it's like, if our system's self-regulate, I can put it this way: if our system is self-regulating, then the need to compulsively use them won't be there. But and also, as we heal, it's very strange. Like, our sensitivity goes up. It's like sometimes my body feels like one big sensing organ, and to put substances in it makes me sick. Like,
interesting.
I had to have a Valium or a painkiller at different times, and it's made me horribly sick, like vomiting, unbelievable nausea. Like, it's almost like a reaction now, because my nervous system has healed. Same as different foods. Like, I can't eat McDonald's without getting very sick. It's like, as my system self-regulates, it starts to reject different things, that it would have used to have found relieving. That's my experience, and look, like, when it comes to heroin, there's always the chance someone can overdose and die. And so I'm always say, well, you'll be able to use heroin recreationally. It's like, I suppose using heroin's not that good of an idea, whether you're addicted or not. There's risk involved. So I hope that kind of answers your question.
Yeah. No, I wouldn't recommend that either, just because it's a more dangerous drug than sugar. But, like, in theory, if there is no difference between one addiction and another, in theory, that could work. Not recommended, but it could work.
Yeah, for sure. I suppose the need to use something recreationally recreationally can go away. It's different to like enjoying a cup of coffee, like if someone's a coffee addict, they don't need to go, well, they may for a period of time, let's say they're drinking like 10 coffees a day.
Yeah.
They may for a period of time need to stop, but as they start to heal, maybe they can sit and enjoy a cup of coffee without that complexity,
I have no doubt that they can.
I can, for sure.
I mean, I'm helping people do that with food, and for some people it's easier than for others, and that's just how it is. And it probably also, I'm not working with trauma, so maybe the people that are taking longer for, they might have a lot of trauma and need to go and see someone like you that can just help them through that experience.
Yeah, sure. And it's like, abstinence isn't the only solution. It's a solution if we want to just, like we spoke about before, stop the presenting behavior, but that's as deep as it goes.
Yeah.
It's possible to have a deeper kind of exploration and understanding and experience. Like I said, it's like, well, we may be able to use drugs recreationally at some point, but at a certain point in our healing, the need for that goes away. It's like a banana, but it's like, but you might not like bananas,
Yeah. I mean, I had the same thing with my sugar addiction. I couldn't stop completely, and I went several years just being in control, and that was such a huge win for me. And then I decided I'm gonna go for at least a year, not touch it. And for about 3 months, I had like a lot of mind drama. I was like, okay, when am I gonna fail? When's the other shoe gonna drop? I didn't have any cravings, but it was just this obsession, like something is going to go wrong.
Yeah.
But by the end of the year, I didn't really want it. I had decided I'm gonna eat ice cream and see how I react to that. It tasted like shit. I was like, this was the wrong ice cream to buy, but whatever. I don't care. Seriously, don't care about it anymore. And now I'm open to eating it, but I choose not to because there is nothing that really speaks to me anymore.
Yeah. So it's a conscious decision, based like a preference there. And it's exactly the same thing, it's like I don't, like, there's a banana in front of me, I don't have a compulsion to eat that banana,
My clients might.
It's monkeys or something, but it's a conscious choice that be there. And like, look, this isn't to say that something may happen in my life and it causes my nervous system, shocks the system back into dysregulation patterns and I'm unable to cope, that I can't then become addicted again. That compulsion can't come back. It can, but so long as my priority is my own inner landscape and I'm prioritizing this work and, I'm doing everything I need to do for my nervous system, it's like that compulsion's, it's not there.
Yeah. And what I think is important as well is, even if that was going to happen to you, you have all the knowledge and you have gone through all of this before, so you will probably be able to pick that up very quickly if you just made that decision.
Exactly. Even if it was to use, I'm as certain as you can be about anything like this, it wouldn't progress into something out of control like it was. I'd have to be unconscious to a lot of different dynamics within for it to progress, snowball to that point. It's like I'd be able to catch it, but and like, look, relapse and abstinence, they're such a huge thing. And the amount of time, like the amount of shame I used to feel when I'd relapse, it's like, I'd get like 10 days, 20 days clean, and then I'd use, and I'd have to go back to an A meeting and like the walk of shame, like I fucked up, like I used again. And it's like that perspective, it's like saying, oh, the child picked up the teddy bear again. That's not good. It's a really condemning, judgmental energy, which compounds trauma. It makes trauma worse in that situation. And that's why when people relapse in those programs, a lot of the time they don't come back for a long time. And they'll stay on because they can't face the shame. It's their feeling of shame that they're running from. It's not the actual judgment. And so when someone relapses, it's like, fine. Like, to me, there's no such thing as failure. it's like when a child's learning to walk, they fall over, scrape their knee. You don't just say, oh, he's never going to learn to walk.
No.
No, what a failure. You know, it's like that's part of the process. You know, it's like it's fine. You know, and I don't even like the term relapse. It's like, you know, did a bit more research. You know, and when I say relapse, I mean compulsively going back to using, like they fall into that space of being out of control again. That's what I would say a relapse is.
Yeah.
And like if someone does that, it's like that's okay. You know, this is your coping strategy. Like I said, heroin kept me alive. Of course, I kept going back to it.
Yeah.
Like have that kind of understanding, like it's okay. Sitting there judging ourselves, condemning ourselves puts our system in a more stressed state, which then it's the opposite to regulation and safety,
Yeah.
and which is what is needed for healing. Right?
Yeah, I don't know what your opinion is, but I don't think that you can heal from an addiction without having relapses along the way. I think we need those learning experiences with the awareness that we didn't have before to actually learn from them. I don't know what your opinion is.
Sure. Well, I've seen some people quit and just stay abstinent, but they're still playing out addiction in different areas of their life. But for like, there's a difference between being abstinent and healing from addiction. You know,
Yeah.
like I feel like healing from addiction is healing from the human condition. You know, it's like healing from the state of consciousness that drives the world. And if you look at like what a heroin addict does, they're using a substance compulsively, or they're doing a behavior compulsively that's detrimental to their lives, destroying their body, you know, destroying their mental health, destroying their environment, destroying their families. It's like that's what we're doing as a species to the planet. You know, we're living out certain behaviors. It's destroying the earth, it's destroying the environment, it's destroying the way we relate to each other, but we can't stop. You know, so it's the same thing on a collective level. You know, we can't stop our collective addictions to our lifestyle, to materialism, to fossil fuels, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
You know, whatever it is, it's the same mechanism playing out on a collective side. So healing from addictions, healing from all of these things, and it's an ongoing journey. You know, it's something that we continue to slip back into in different areas. We don't have to judge ourselves and condemn ourselves for it, but we're healing from, like, we're kind of transmuting, alchemizing the human condition. It's addiction is the human condition. It's just people using substance.
Yeah, absolutely. So if you don't mind, I just have one little question. So if we assume that everyone has some degree of trauma, and someone is watching this now and like, yeah, I have a food problem, or I have an addiction to whatever it might be, but I don't have any trauma. Is there a way for them to start exploring that themselves?
Yeah, sure. Like, look, it's a very broad question, because like a lot of most people wouldn't consider traumatic can be very traumatic. Like being left to cry as a baby dysregulates the nervous system. That can be, well, that is traumatic for a baby. So, and the whole generation was told by doctors, leave your baby to cry. And when a baby cries and doesn't come out of, or isn't assisted by mum to come out of stress, they move into a freeze response. And then everyone's like, oh, they've self-soothed. You know, really, they've dissociated and frozen. That's trauma.
Yeah.
You can be carrying that in your adult life, not even know that your mum, you know, your mum didn't. It's like a implicit memory where the body remembers, and the nervous system is dysregulated. You might not remember it when you're 40, 30 with your food addiction, but your nervous system is dysregulated from that experience. And other things like, you know, at school, we ask a question and everyone laughs at us and we contract. Something says, you an idiot, why'd you ask that question? And we get kind of stuck in ourselves. We shut down, we collapse. If we don't have assistance and an ability to come out of that, you know, the next time I go to put my hand up, something will say, don't do it. It's not safe. That's the unmetabolized experience that lives in us. You know, we're still holding on to that. And all of these things can show up as different personality traits, ways we function in the world, ways we relate to other people. You know, my suggestion there is to become informed and aware around trauma and what trauma is. There's plenty of new neuroscience understandings around our survival physiology, around developmental trauma. And it's like anyone who reads it, it's like, yep, I've got this. You can see it's like you can relate, I take the free course that we've got, trauma informed coaching with the Center for Healing. You'll relate, you'll resonate.
Yeah. No, it's a good course. I've done it if anyone wants to do it.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'm sure everyone would find something in there that they can relate to,
Yeah. So what about generational trauma, like DNA level?
Yeah.
That isn't even your trauma. What about that?
Sure. There's a study done with mice where they would spray cherry blossom into the cage, and at the same time as spraying the cherry blossom, they'd give them the mouse a zap, like an electric shock.
Yeah.
So the mouse then started to associate the cherry blossom with threat, with danger, pain. And eventually they would just spray the cherry blossom and the mouse would go into a full-blown trauma state. And 2 generations later, or maybe 3, I can't remember the exact number of the study, but generations later, that mouse great-great-great-grandchildren would have the same response to cherry blossom. And so those nervous system adaptations to threat, the trauma response was passed down generations without even being shocked. So it's like that survival adaptation, the physiology passed it down to the next generation because it seemed like this is a smart thing to do to survive. This is threatening, so we're going to pass that information down. And if you think about, that means we carry everything our parents went through that wasn't metabolized, which can potentially be activated by specific environmental circumstance. So if we're in the same patterns, the same environments as our grandparents, it can activate those same trauma generational cycles over and over, and we can be in stress and dysregulated and not know why and not be able to cognitively make sense of it or relate it back to a specific experience in our lives.
Yeah. So you might just be guessing if you answer this question, but if I did some trauma work to correct a generational trauma, would that protect my children from getting it?
If you did some trauma work?
Yeah.
To
regulate. Yeah.
Yeah, I would say yes. Like I haven't done a scientific study on that, but that's my intuitive, visceral, felt sense. Like I'm a father of the experience, like the things I metabolize and work through from my own lineage and generational line doesn't get passed on to my kids.
Yeah.
It's like it's alchemized, it's integrated, and so then they experience different ways of relating to me, because a lot of our trauma is passed down relationally too. The way our parents talk to us, their tone of voice, presence that they hold, etc. And that shifts and changes within me as I start to heal. So then it creates a different dynamic with my children, which gets passed down, a more healed, holistic, integrated way of relating to each other, which then affects their sense of self, their self-worth, the way they view the world, the way they view themselves, etc. So for sure, like healing gets passed down generationally just as much as trauma does if we do the work.
Yeah. Okay, so what type of people are you helping? Are you only helping people with addictions, or do you help like the general populations? Who do you work with?
Anyone. Like it started off mainly people with addictions, and then as my perspective broadened and I started to, include, everyone is suffering from this same thing. Just because I was a heroin addict doesn't make me any different or more in need of help, someone else. But like anyone who has repeating patterns, different difficulties. I work with some parents because they don't want to pass stuff on to their kids. I work with, a lot of families who have kids who are suffering from addiction. The spectrum is very broad.
Yeah. Okay, that's fine. So if anyone wants to get in contact with you or work with you, where can they reach you?
It's mattk.com.au. kay.com.au. You can send an email. Like I do one-on-one sessions. There's a bit of a waiting list. There's also like different mentorship programs. So work with me for 8 weeks. And there's also trainings, the Center for Healing, Embodied Processing, level 1 and 2, and a bunch of different courses as well. And like I said, there's the free trauma-informed coaching course as well, if finances are a difficulty. But there's plenty you can find on me.
Awesome. Any last words you want to share that you think maybe people need to hear?
Look, like I've covered a lot of things in this. You told me to tell my story, but I ended up like weaving everything into my story, because that's what I mean. It's kind of like an experiential journey. And like the best thing we can do, the most conducive thing we can do to our own healing is keeping a curious, exploratory attitude and orientation. Like Peter Levine says, curiosity is the opposite of trauma. And so when we can keep that attitude of exploration, like, what is this? Rather than coming from that condemning, shaming, like there's something wrong with me, it opens up things to unravel, in a much more fluid and organic, natural way. It's like healing doesn't happen by forcing things to heal. It happens by opening to things, by beginning to see things and gain insight. And so this journey doesn't have to be arduous. Like it can be, an exploration. Like if we keep that inquisitive, inquiring mind.
I love that. Well, thank you so much for being here. As I said, I could probably talk to you for several hours still. It's so interesting. So I just want to say thank you very much from both me and all my listeners. I know they're going to love this episode. So thank you.
You're welcome.